Imagine if you went to therapy and your counselor turned out to be a polyamorous transgender furry with multiple personalities. No need to imagine, you're about to find out. The person you're seeing is an online content creator and mental health counselor who goes by the name of Poppy, and in the past few years, they've been involved in a mire of drama and allegations. But before being Poppy, they were Joshua, an aspiring mental health worker who, in the early 2000s, married Juliana, a girl a few years older, with her being in her mid-20s and Joshua being just 19 years old. Most importantly, perhaps, she was 3 months pregnant with someone else's child. But he loved her so much that he was more than willing to marry her and adopt the child as his own. This isn't something many men are willing to do, but before you think this is some kind of admirable act of self-sacrifice in the name of love, Joshua, that is, after he became Poppy, not only came to regret this, but actually claimed that they were somehow groomed into the role of husband and parent, despite already being 19 years old when the decision to marry Juliana was made.
When I met my kid's mom, I buried every bit of trans that was in me and basically decided to do the whole like heteronormativity thing for a long time because I was A, scared of transitioning, and B, was thinking this was the right thing to do. I was an idiot, but it did give my kid a parent.
Whether Poppy here is a reliable narrator or not, I'll let you decide. But what's suggested is that they were already trans at this point, and internalized transphobia is what got them into that position. That, or this is just how Poppy rationalized their underlying wish for the regular family life they once had. Unfortunately, this is something they didn't experience for long, since soon after the marriage took place and the child was born, Juliana tragically passed away in a horse riding accident, leaving Joshua to be a single parent to their 3-year-old daughter. There's truly no overstating the magnitude of losing your partner while you still have a very small child to take care of, and part of everything that happens from here on out is set in motion by this event. According to Poppy, their daughter is autistic, though it's worth saying he deduced this was the case without a proper diagnosis from a doctor.
Yeah, so I was not always been the smartest cookie, and one of the things is I didn't have any idea how autism worked because I don't have it. I knew how ADHD worked, I had that down, but autism was not something I understood, and my kid was pretty autistic, and none of the doctors, the people I took them to, not a single person ever mentioned a damn thing, probably because they're AFAB.
Though information is scant on the pre-2010 years, we can assume that it was roughly during this period that Joshua attended Wayne State University, studying to eventually become a mental health counselor. He'd left a career in restaurant management behind to focus on getting the degrees he would need to do this, but despite these healthy ambitions, there were signs not everything was okay. The first sign of the extremely sexually impulsive behavior that would eventually be their undoing was when, immediately after his wife died, he got with a random goth chick from a Renaissance fair because she was hot and he needed someone in bed now that he wasn't married. I understand everyone deals with grief differently, not judging here, but they effectively put their child in danger. Poppy's daughter, whom I'll be referring to as Spawn since that's their online handle, eventually made a Tumblr post saying, "Poppy's first partner after my biological mom died was abusive and I still have trauma from that." It's unsure what exactly was meant by this because abusive can mean a whole variety of things. Regardless, it's very possible this is in reference to the aforementioned random goth girl, meaning Joshua's pleasure-seeking activity exposed his daughter to a freak, potentially some kind of predator. Speaking of predators, Poppy has also claimed that not only were they a victim of CSA, but, and I quote, they reduplicated it and did it to someone else, this someone else being their younger cousin. It's important to say that this event allegedly took place when Poppy was a teenager and obviously not operating at their full rational capacity. However, it is inevitably something to keep in mind going forward, since believe me, it will become relevant. Another thing to remember is that Poppy is also admitted to being abusive to Spawn, which is confirmed by the latter in the same Tumblr post I just read from. While Spawn didn't specify what this consisted of, they suggested that it wasn't that bad, at least in this post. After this first partner, there were 3 more that Spawn could remember, presumably taking place anywhere between 2004 and the mid-2010s, none of which are considered relevant. It's only in the mid to late 2010s that Poppy, at some point, still going by Joshua, meets Xena, their primary partner and the one who is most known for appearing in the streams, mostly staying quiet while doing activities like knitting or coloring. Go play Warhammer like a real autistic person. Due to her passive demeanor, it's easy to trick yourself into thinking Xena is somehow milder in nature than Poppy, but you'd be very wrong. Xena, like Poppy, has a checkered past, and while she probably would like for people to only focus on the one time she played the martyr and got heroically kicked out of a Boy Scout camp for admitting to being a lesbian, it's not the non-binary furry coming out of the closet that's interesting here, but the skeletons that are still in it. Not many specifics are known in regard to the people she allegedly victimized or the nature of her actions, but another Tumblr post, presumably from someone in the same LGBT community as her, said, "Do not trust Xena. She is an abusive misogynist who has assaulted women in LGBT safe spaces. She is an aggressive trans misogynist who intimidates trans women, refuses to allow discussion of her trans misogyny, and preys on trans women. women. Though I do have to emphasize that these are just allegations, so as always, take it with a grain of salt. To add another layer of Machiavellian behavior on top of these claims, many people, including Spawn, have said that the whole being a quiet little grandma thing on stream is fully in act, as behind the scenes, Xena is even more aggressive and domineering than Poppy. Now is as good of a time as any to get into the alphabet soup of illnesses these people have, beginning with Xena. There are a couple physical conditions like migraines and IBS. Remember, she's a furry and probably owns a fursuit. Imagine how bad it smells. These are often cited as reasons for her being unemployed, along with something called PMDD, which is short for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, meaning dysphoria associated with accentuated PMS symptoms. But it's not just not having a job that Xena uses these issues as an excuse for. Any and all bad behavior gets swept under the rug of her conditions. If she gets upset and takes her frustration out on people, no matter how aggressive and methodical she can get, it's all the fault of her PMDD. But there may be a little wrinkle to that explanation. Xena takes testosterone, and the thing about taking T is in some cases it can literally give you roid rage, especially if you're someone with naturally low levels like she obviously would have. I'm not an endocrinologist, nor am I a specialist on PMDD, but while it is a real condition, it's not the root of her behavior issues, as many people would later point out. Seems odd that the testosterone doesn't even get considered in the discussion, but my point stands regardless. In Spawn's post, they describe Xena as not so bad when they first moved in, claiming that the only unusual thing about her was that she got sick very often due to their other housemates not being respectful about the substances they brought into the house. I'll have to do some text interpretation here because this could mean a lot of things. First off, it's entirely possible that housemates here may be referring to other partners of Poppy's due to their polyamorous lifestyle, but I'm not even sure that this was being practiced this early on in the timeline. As far as substances go, this may mean drug abuse was going on in the same household that a child lived in, which is worrisome to say the least. However, knowing Xena has intestinal issues and can't eat gluten, it may just be talking about foods that triggered her IBS. But as the 2010s approached their latter half, a lot of things changed. First off, after aiming to become a provider of gender-affirming healthcare, Poppy decided to get high off their own supply and transition as well, which is when the Poppy name popped up. At this point, Xena was still a neutral to positive presence in the household, sometimes even aiding Spawn with school and disability services. However, things changed drastically when 2020 rolled around, and all of them were confined inside their home. The aforementioned housemates were no longer present at this point, which is important since this meant it was just Poppy, Xena, and Spawn, who despite not being a minor anymore, was still obviously the person with the least authority in the household, being seen as and treated like a child. Absent other people who could potentially serve as checks and balances for dysfunctional and abusive behavior, Xena's true nature reared its ugly head. Spawn's Tumblr post reads, "Xena gradually became meaner and more controlling of me, despite numerous claims of them not wanting to be my parent. This is where those structured chore times and meal times start to come into play. Now that Poppy was working from home, Xena had to be in the living room a lot. Poppy always defended me when Xena had arguments, one-sided yelling matches with me, but as time went on, she started siding with Xena more and more. I didn't really notice at first because I still loved and defended my mom. It was my friends who pointed out that my mom was treating me poorly in May of 2022. The trouble started way before that though. I just didn't realize it was abuse and mistreatment." We'll get to the details of these chore and meal restrictions later when they're elaborated on by Spawn in a document made after they left the household. While it's still possible, let's stay chronological. While 2020 was named as the year things began to change, it went by mostly silent, a kind of calm before the storm. It was only in February 2021 that Poppy began having an online presence to speak of, and that's when things really kicked into hyperdrive. The second video Poppy ever posted to their YouTube channel was about how all mental health counselors have to be left-wing for them to practice ethically. In and of itself, this is the kind of OG Tumblrina core content that gets you ridiculed online, but compared to their later actions, this is a fart in the wind. The third video detailed their personal history with BPD, a sign that Poppy was nearing final form. Like Cell from Dragon Ball Z, but with mental illnesses instead of Ki. Their interest in treating mental illnesses became, or maybe always was, secondary to developing them like a human petri dish. I will admit that I have no idea which of these are amateur self-diagnoses and which are things real psychiatrists and psychologists have diagnosed Poppy with, but I'll go over all of them nonetheless. First off, they claim to have borderline personality disorder, and though the nature of this condition isn't super well understood, to put it bluntly, Poppy is to BPD the same way Xena is to PMDD, a mental condition that serves as an umbrella for any kind of misbehavior. Poppy also claims to have OSDD, and I'll save you from hearing the technical rigmarole and simplify it as a milder form of having multiple personalities, referred to as being plural. The thing is, being plural isn't recognized as a real thing, at least not yet. As a matter of fact, it's closely associated with kids who watch too much TikTok and start thinking they're anime characters in real life, life and start giving themselves mental illnesses so that they have an identity to cling to. Before you consider the possibility that there is some credence to the claims of being plural, Poppy's headmates, because that's what they're referred to, are Penny, a tiger-shark hybrid described as a young girl, and Pepper, a tiger-spider hybrid that is canonically 12 to 14 years old. Does this sound creepy and insane to you?
It probably should.
Poppy's main identity also has an animal self, a hyena, specifically because female hyenas have what is called a pseudo-penis. I won't go too deep into explaining how that works because this video is already enough as is, but from the names with alliteration, the fursonas, and the bizarre age-related connotations, all of this is pretty disturbing, especially since Poppy has publicly admitted to having victimized a minor once, but we'll get to the practical implications of these alters later. The content being released was par for the course. One claimed that not dating trans people if you were straight meant you were a Nazi, and another begged everyone to wear masks, nothing too unusual for the political ideology Poppy espoused. Let's also not forget that the thumbnails of these videos looked like decomposing remains of an Armored Skeptic clone from 2014. Perhaps one of the most important and hypocritical pieces of content is one video titled "Authoritarian Parenting Can Lead to Abuse." Unsurprisingly, it seems that is exactly what was going on behind the scenes. As previously mentioned, Spawn eventually made a document cataloging the Discord messages they'd sent about the abuse going on at their house. The document noticeably doesn't cover the years 2020 and 2021, probably because Spawn was still under the illusion that Poppy and Xena's behavior was somehow redeemable, believing that it'd eventually stop and normal life would resume. However, after 2 years, not only did nothing improve, but it actually got worse. I can only assume that 2022 is when Spawn worked up the courage to start telling others about what they were going through. Many things documented here aren't that egregious, but instead they serve as proof that Poppy and Xena are only really hypersensitive when it serves them. For example, there's an instance here of Poppy saying that triggers are bullshit, something the majority of their audience would probably be appalled by. But there are some serious claims here as well. In May of 2022, Spawn describes how Xena forbade her from showering because she might need to use the bathroom, without specifying when. The context of this is that Spawn hadn't bathed in days and was walking around in 80-degree heat. Once they got home, Spawn, over text messages, asked Xena for permission to use the shower and got it, only for the permission to immediately be revoked, with Xena saying, "Actually, you should wait until we get home so the dog won't be alone for the 15 to 20 minutes you'll be in the shower for." If this seems like someone making up arbitrary rules just for the pleasure of micromanaging someone else, it's because that's what it is. Just 10 days later, Xena delivers a prolonged browbeating session over text messages, repeatedly telling Spawn not to move any of her things whatsoever, regardless of circumstance. The thing is, they're talking about objects that were sprawled over the couch, and Spawn only moved them to clean the room. In June, we get an exchange in which Poppy is complaining about how long it took Spawn to do the dishes, neglecting the fact that there were 3 days worth of dishes in the kitchen. I'm starting to believe in the horseshoe theory because of this. This is Mussolini tier obsession with punctuality. The trains must run on time. No more chuddies jumping on the bed. Spawn proceeds to complain about this on Discord, saying, "You can't offload 3 days of dishes on me and then get mad when it takes a long time. Then they got mad at me for waking up late and got mad at me for starting my bed routine 30 minutes late. I am 22, but every aspect of my life is time. I still have a bedtime, and they keep moving said bedtime earlier and earlier because of not doing other things on time. I literally have ADHD, autism, and a heart condition. I can't always do things on time, especially in the heat because of my blood disorder, which means heat affects me so much worse. I collapsed a few weeks ago, and we don't have an AC and haven't since March." The blood disorder being referred to here is POTS, a condition that can be really debilitating depending on severity. Basically, it means being upright for too long, and excess heat can cause intense fatigue, nausea, and other similar symptoms. Again, for someone with this condition, an AC isn't just a convenience, but can actually keep them functional while indoors. It would be inconsiderate for a regular person to leave their kid with POTS for 3 months without AC, but considering how much Poppy and Xena virtue signal about being supportive and wholesome in their content, it's a highlight of their hypocrisy. In another incident, Spawn went to the kitchen later than usual, only for Xena to tell them they couldn't get lunch anymore. Attached is an exchange between Poppy and Spawn, which went as follows. "I get that I was late, but I need food. I should be allowed to get food when I need it." Poppy: "We have a schedule in our house. You need to follow that." Xena doesn't get personal time with constant interruptions. "While I agree with you that making lunch shouldn't be an issue, in the past, the problem is that often making lunch has been noisy or a time to overly interact with Xena. You are also positive with COVID. That's an issue as well. Please remember that. The schedule as a whole is more important because it will prevent close contact. Spawn explained that being sick made them hungrier than usual, to no avail. I don't know about you, but I find it strange that Poppy is willing to let their biological child go hungry while they're sick, mind you, just to give Xena uninterrupted personal time. The interruption here being noises in the kitchen, which I guess are enough to disturb her precious peace. Another example of this is when Spawn recounts having to go get water from the fridge in order to take their medication, only for this to disturb Xena, who started complaining about how that should have been done ahead of time. The only reason Spawn was doing that was that their tap water was shut off due to maintenance, something unpredictable and not within their control. I have to make a caveat here to say, is Xena sleeping in the kitchen? What kind of arrangement is this that you can't do absolutely anything in the kitchen? Otherwise, the Dark Souls boss that is your furry stepmom will awaken and hurt you. Just a day later, Spawn says, convinced Xena is genuinely trying to starve me. I was about to make spaghetti, and Xena told me to make something quick. I go to make a PB&J, but realize I don't have any jelly, so I ask my parents if I can use their Smucker's brand one, and they say yes. Already put peanut butter on one half of the sandwich at this point, realize the Smucker's jelly is moldy and smells really bad, so I ask if I can use the other jelly in the fridge that's Xena's, for, need I remind you, a single sandwich. Xena says no and says, if I let you use it, then I won't have any left. Poppy has to convince them to let me use their jelly for one singular sandwich. Arbitrarily controlling food intake is a very common kind of abuse of parental authority, and given Xena is on test, as we've already established, it may be the cause of this antagonistic and territorial relationship she developed with the Spawn. However, while Xena was the main person behind terrorizing Spawn, Poppy also played a role. Despite regularly complaining that it was Spawn's own fault that their blood disorder acted up, claiming that they weren't eating properly, Poppy did things like labeling and withholding salami, one of the very few sources of protein in the house. I guess the furry thing was realer than I thought. These people are behaving like actual animals and claiming food like they're hunter-gatherers. From acting like putting plastic cups in the dishwasher was unforgivable, to yelling at Spawn for proactively putting up a gate for their dog, a chore that Poppy and Xena had neglected to do for months, it seemed there was nothing Spawn could do to please them. To make matters worse, Poppy told Spawn things like, I don't think you can ever repair what you've done to your relationship with Xena, as if she was the one at fault for it deteriorating. Spawn was yelled at for going to the kitchen outside of their allotted time, yelled at for moving furniture to vacuum their bedroom, and punished with more chores. When Spawn complained, Poppy and Xena said that the domestic issues should be discussed during family meetings. But when the time came for these meetings, they either ignored everything or claimed Spawn was in the wrong. Noticing that things were being pushed to their breaking point, Poppy and Xena decided to task Spawn with making a list of things they were upset about, and the list was promptly made. It pointed out that Poppy and Xena didn't respect the strict bathroom and kitchen times, and for things to be fair, everyone should have free access to all common areas of the house. Additionally, Spawn complains that P and Z often didn't do their chores at all, letting them accumulate until Spawn had to do them all. While Poppy and Xena could opt out of doing something if they had a migraine, Spawn had to thug it out no matter how bad their pots got, and not only get things done, but get them done on time. To add to the previous mention of arbitrarily controlling food intake, not only was Spawn frequently forbidden from entering the kitchen, they also couldn't even bring snacks with them into their room, not even if they were drinks, which people with pots regularly need to maintain their salt intake and treat their condition. Based on the list alone, it's easy to interpret that while Poppy just seems negligent and occasionally unfair, Xena is systematically abusive. By doing things like limiting Spawn's access to the dog for no reason, and deliberately excluding Spawn from meals, it looks as if any source of positive reinforcement was getting cut off. One of the most damning aspects of the control they had was that no money was to be spent without approval from Poppy and Xena, even if the money belonged to Spawn, something many people have called financial abuse, since Poppy did, at one point, threaten to freeze Spawn's account. The list was concluded with a warning that if these complaints weren't attended to, Spawn intended to move out. This wasn't an empty threat, since Spawn had been planning to do so already, speaking to an unnamed friend to secure temporary housing in case the abuse worsened. However, Poppy caught wind of this and got mad at Spawn for it. This was Poppy's assessment of the list. Half of the list items were just dishonest, and half of them were partial framings that ignored any context. To be clear, I'm not a perfect parent. I was young, abusive, and shitty when they were young, and dealing with the grief of their mom dying. But I spent 15 years in therapy and Zen Buddhism trying to make up for that shit, only to watch them try to become a wedge between myself and my fiancé. Text messages show Xena becoming upset at merely being asked what her credit score was, despite the context obviously being to help Spawn move out. Poppy and Xena's complete lack of cooperation put the plans to move out on an indefinite hold. Meanwhile, after spending a week at a friend's place, Spawn comes back to find out that the house was so neglected in their absence that actual mold had grown on the counter. Not some moist and dark corner of the house, the kitchen counter. Every attempt to make domestic living less confusing and conflicting acting was shot down, usually by Xena, who refused to do simple things like use tone indicators over messages to improve communication, which is, I don't even understand why this is tone indicators. Why are tone indicators needed? Or let Spawn use the microwave after they hadn't eaten anything for 8 hours. On that last part, Spawn did eventually eat 2 hours later, making for a total of 10 hours without food because Xena might get a migraine. Xena refused to drive Spawn to the dentist because she might get a migraine. Xena accused Spawn of lying about their POTS. Xena deliberately used Spawn's mealtime, preventing them from eating anything. Are you getting the picture here? It's important to note that at this point, not only was Spawn paying for rent, but also paying for the food they ate, meaning there was absolutely nothing justifying their lack of authority over anything. The extremely strict rules were bad enough as is, but the fact that P and Z didn't even try to respect them made it all significantly worse. The best example of this is that while you can't even fart in the vicinity of Xena without giving her a migraine, Poppy often barged into the bathroom while Spawn was using it, and when confronted about it, they responded with the following: "If the door's open, I can come in whenever I want. I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable." By November 2022, Spawn still had access to their bank account, but for the entirety of that month, they were forbidden from buying any food that had to be stored in the freezer or fridge, meaning despite having money, they were limited to getting things like granola bars. Spawn was now living under the threat of having their internet access cut off, and with it, communication from friends, which is a telltale sign of abuse and even cult-like behavior. This was done under the excuse that Spawn needed to get a job, but then again, not having access to the internet makes job hunting harder than it needs to be. The stress was so bad that their hair started falling out again. The incidents continued to worsen as the end of the year approached, with Xena yelling at Spawn for getting cereal at 11 a.m. when no one else was in the kitchen. Xena was in her bedroom before deciding to get up and chase after Spawn just to berate them. When Poppy caught wind of this, all they had to say was, "I'm sorry you felt yelled at." Despite wanting the authority that came with being a parent, Xena hated the idea of actually being a parent and having to care for the person she was lording over. Chores were weaponized as a way to prevent Spawn from being able to see their friends, but whenever this was met with unhappiness, Xena tried to play the victim and claimed Spawn was framing her as abusive. Despite outright saying she didn't want to be Spawn's parent, she threatened to get guardianship custody over them if they didn't get a job. Even when Poppy occasionally relapsed and was minimally nice to Spawn, Xena made sure to intervene and prevent it. In one instance, Poppy was about to let Spawn use the bathroom, unscheduled, but Xena made sure that didn't happen and kept them waiting another 15 minutes. As 2023 began, Spawn was occasionally burdened with over 7 hours of chores, and if they didn't get it done, they lost access to the internet. Bad enough as it already was, there were signs that it was about to worsen. Poppy, in another Munchausen by proxy moment, decided that Spawn had dissociative identity disorder and was actively trying to get her diagnosed with it. This potentially meant that Spawn stood to lose every last bit of their agency and be forced to be under the care of P and Z permanently, not to mention potentially taking psychiatric meds to ensure her compliance. In another example of cult-like behavior, Poppy was withholding Spawn's mail, which almost caused them to lose health insurance. Internet access began being frequently withheld as a punishment for not doing chores up to Xena's satisfaction. The most egregious example of this being when Spawn was told that if they did all of the chores during the weekend, they'd get internet back on Monday. The thing is, when Monday came, the internet didn't, and when Spawn asked about it, they were accused of badgering Poppy and Xena punished them by, you guessed it, withholding the internet. Supposedly, this was because some chore wasn't done, but it wasn't specified which one. When Spawn asked Poppy, they realized neither knew, meaning Xena was keeping both of them in the dark, probably because there was no chore that went undone, and she just wanted to punish Spawn again. This could have been easily rectified with a brief conversation with Xena, but of course, she had a stomach bug and couldn't be bothered. The documented instances of abuse in 2023 become noticeably sparse because at this point, Spawn spent more time without access to the internet than with it. All of it culminated in late April, when, after spending 10 days offline, Spawn listed 2 job-related appointments they needed internet for, only for Xena to say that internet access could only be given if Spawn made a satisfactory offering in exchange. We've officially moved from abusive parent to tyrant all the way to Old Testament pagan deity. Xena does sound like some ancient Babylonian demon, all things considered. However, when Spawn asked what was considered an acceptable offering, Xena told her that she had to figure it out on her own. Later on, as it turns out, this was a test of some kind, and Spawn failed, though I have no clue what that means. If I were to guess, that was just the excuse Xena came up with to explain this obviously insane request. About half a month later, Spawn said they were going out for the day and proceeded to escape through the window, emptying out a trust fund of theirs in order to afford the cost of leaving the house. When talking about this on stream, Poppy inadvertently confesses to not being concerned about their kid whatsoever, and instead just being worried about the money Spawn had taken. This is the degree of lovelessness we're talking about. Imagine if your kid went AWOL and all you thought about was money. From this entire story, you might be wondering wondering if this dynamic duo has made other victims. And the answer is a definite yes. As I mentioned much earlier, Poppy is polyamorous. Though the only partner who's really stuck around through thick and thin is Xena, the other partners are a revolving door of people with differing degrees of relevance. Until around the time Spawn left the house, which is early to mid 2023, there weren't many negative things being publicly said about Poppy and Xena, even if some people already disliked them. However, Poppy's behavior grew more and more erratic. The first sign something was wrong was when replying to a tweet by someone called Aaron, Poppy made a sexual insinuation about them, which was met with only one word: gross. But that's not the important part of the story. Poppy got quite upset about this exchange, saying, "I am a xenogender trans woman who literally uses a neurogender based on being hypersexual and a survivor of CSA." She simply could have said it made her uncomfortable. I would have apologized and deleted the tweet. I also stand by my behavior. I flirt with everyone over 18, and if I cross a line, I will always apologize and make amends. I do not deserve this framing or BS. If you legitimately think I'm in the wrong, block me. It's ironic that this was said because the only reason this rant happened was due to Aaron doing just that, blocking Poppy. Woven through the tweets is the word succubian, a word Poppy uses to describe the xenogender, or maybe the neurogender, whatever it is that's responsible for the unsolicited comments, as if giving it a name made it any less inappropriate. In the same way PMDD and BPD have been used to justify bad behavior so far, Poppy's unhealthy sexual dynamics and compulsive lewdness are excused under the guise of them being succubian. However, we'd soon come to find out this signaled a much deeper problem, one which few knew about. While the situation I'm about to go over happened around the same time, May 2023, information about it only came out in August of that year, when someone named Melina made a Twitter thread accusing Poppy and Xena of being abusive hypocrites. We begin the series of screenshots compiled and shared by Melina, with Xena love-bombing her into sticking around and being extra supportive to Poppy and Xena. If you don't know what love-bombing is, it's when an abuser, consciously or otherwise, overloads their target with positive reinforcement so that when said reinforcement is withheld, they feel inclined to do anything to get it back, becoming easy to manipulate. This is immediately followed by prints of Poppy talking about the rates paid to their YouTube channel's editors, who are repeatedly referred to as volunteers, so I'm not too sure about the specifics of their arrangement. But regardless of the details, the highlights of these messages is when Poppy admits that being in sexual relationships with multiple of the people working on the channel makes it more difficult to keep things functional. Call me old-fashioned, but being in a relationship with your employees doesn't sound like a good idea. Though I understand the temptation. My editor, for example, is in possession of an immense BBL, but I resist the temptation to keep my business afloat. Once Poppy's done talking, Xena shows her true colors and essentially starts berating one of the editors for having gone to just Poppy instead of both of them to talk about their rates, something she claimed was erasing her, prompting her to say, "If anyone's behavior is not up to standards, then they will not be on this team." Now that sounds like the Xena we know. Melina, who happened to be friends with the editor who was getting berated, decided to get on voice call with them, only for Xena to start getting aggressive and yelling nonstop. Sound familiar? Once Melina expressed concern that this may cause more issues in the future, Xena brought up the PMDD. From this point onward, perhaps noticing that Melina wasn't as malleable as other people, Xena became distrustful and even paranoid, in fear that information was being gathered on Poppy and Xena for an eventual expose thread. Turns out Xena was right, almost as if she was self-aware that she was an abuser, fated to eventually be exposed. Just a day later, Xena began doing the same routine she did to Spawn, deliberately not clarifying the tone of text messages and rejecting any attempt from Melina to get on voice chat to minimize miscommunication. It's not too worth it to get into the details surrounding it, but Xena and Melina went back and forth for a long time, with Xena repeatedly implying that while the PMDD excused her attitude, no conditions or triggers could excuse Melina's. This entire thing is so cancer. The conflict between them drove a wedge between Melina and Poppy as well, though the relationship was already fated to fail because Poppy was revealed to be a lot less comfortable with polyamory than they pretended to be. Soon after Melina mentioned that they were going to see another partner, Poppy began producing issues out of thin air about how this should have been talked about earlier, though it was clear that the real problem was that Melina was giving someone else attention. This is a pattern we're going to see with Poppy actually being polygamous instead of polyamorous, meaning they want multiple partners, but the rule is that they have to all be solely loyal to Poppy. Not only is this noticeable with Melina, but Poppy publicly expressed discomfort at the sight of another partner of theirs, Sage, interacting in a sexual manner with another user. abuser, though we'll get to Sage later. This is textbook stuff here. First, they love bomb, then, when any kind of issue comes up, they demand unquestioning submission. And if it's not given, they start cutting the person off and making snarky subtweets to psychologically terrorize them. After incessantly messaging Poppy and Xena over the course of weeks to try and patch things up between them, and after Poppy continued leading them on and feeding them false hope, Xena finally dropped the hammer, saying, "You still don't take us seriously, do you? You can't make decisions for me with PMDD. I don't need you in that way, and I don't want you in on my PMDD. I don't think you have the skills to deal with me or Poppy during any kind of mental triggers." Yeah, I don't think anyone has those skills, to be honest. What Xena calls skills to deal with them during mental triggers actually just means putting up with her bullshit. It adds to the overall absurdity that this was said in response to Melina trying to better understand how these conditions affected them. So, you can't ignore the conditions, but you also can't try to understand how they work to prevent them from causing unnecessary conflicts. You can only believe in what Poppy and Xena say because they'd never lie to you. That, or they don't want to establish how these conditions affect them because then they can't blame random acts of abuse on the conditions anymore. To top it all off, Xena actually tries to frame Melina doing research into PMDD as if it were a violation of consent, and I have absolutely no idea how that works. My guess is that Melina looking into how PMDD works made Xena feel like a scammer getting audited. Someone's about to uncover their racket. After they broke up and Melina left the server, Xena proceeded to post on the server informing everyone about what happened, but of course framing Melina as a toxic person in a variety of ways, none of which reflected what actually went down. A while after their relationship was over and done with, Poppy and Xena continued to rub it in by bringing it up on stream and further besmirching Melina to their audience, only to brush it off when confronted about it, pretending they were actually talking about someone else. Around the same period, Poppy, in a decision influenced by reading lesbian fanfiction, decided to get bottom surgery and create a GoFundMe to finance it. Once that was successful, it was followed by yet another fundraiser, this time for a facial feminization procedure. As small as they were, P&Z had a pretty faithful audience, and Melina's thread didn't do that much damage to their perception in the community. However, much more people also came forward following Melina. The first person who really got the ball rolling on Poppy and Xena's demise was Noah Flake, about whom a Google Doc was made containing an exhaustive amount of their online interactions, showing Poppy doing the same thing they did to Melina, guilt-tripping them about their other partners. Poppy claimed that just seeing one of their own partners online actually gave them a panic attack, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of insane jealousy. The self-obsessed BPD maniac posting was compounded by the fact that, as mentioned earlier, Poppy claims to be plural, and actually has multiple Twitter accounts that interact with one another, publicly talking about the people they're in relationships with and tagging them to make sure they see it. By far, Poppy's obsession with Noah Flake was the worst one, counting the hours until they got to meet. I'll also make a brief caveat here that Poppy referred to Noah Flake as mom, which I just found really weird. The doc has a lot of Discord exchanges between them, which I won't read because neither of us deserve that much torture, but Poppy repeatedly flips from an age-regressed, needy personality to a hyper-aggressive, jealous, and demanding one. To shorten a ridiculously complicated story involving two plural people and their constant switching alters, it seems Noah Flake got sick of the pressure to give Poppy attention all the time and always explicitly reschedule whenever they weren't going to do that, so they broke things off. Or at least they tried to. It's never that easy with Poppy. The breakup crushed Poppy, who was in peak obsession with Noah Flake, and Xena decided to step in, attempting to gaslight Noah about it. In one exchange, when Noah communicates that Poppy is demanding 100% of their time and energy, Xena simply claims that it hasn't happened, and proceeds to blame Noah for Poppy's meltdown using the good old BPD excuse. I'm not even sure what Xena was trying to do here. Argue Noah into unbreaking up with Poppy? How could anything good ever come of that? And to add to the general derangedness of the situation, Xena tries to guilt trip Noah about them agreeing to be the parent to a kid. The kid not being Spawn, but instead being one of Poppy's alters. I can't make this up. Unfortunately, Noah fell for the guilt trip and re-added Poppy, and the following message was written by a 41-year-old grown-up, person. Runs over for hugs.
I love you, and you can't go. You scared me, but I accept your apology.
Squeezes you tightly. Admittedly, there's a lot of context and conversation surrounding this, but this part really takes the cake. I'm going insane reading this. After a bunch of age-regressed, weepy guilt tripping, Poppy sends a random selfie, apparently to elicit some kind of emotion from Noah Flake, ultimately failing, prompting even more weepy guilt tripping, which, mind you, went on for 15 hours straight at one point. All of this was done to convince Noah Flake to meet with Poppy in real life at a hotel. And I'll add that not only were they begging for Noah to come, but they also paid for the flight to get there and the hotel stay, almost $1,000 worth of costs in total. When they finally did meet, they had a sexual encounter initiated by Poppy. But Noah immediately regretted it and finally broke up. Poppy didn't like that, not one bit. On the 23rd of December, this tweet was posted, with Poppy saying, "You broke a mentally ill woman for fun after your headmate was emotionally abusive to me, and you abandoned a child because it was convenient after you sexually took advantage of Poppy to see if you still loved her. Pepper can't be found in Headspace, and it is your fault." And what did we get? Emotional harm, a lot of tears, and possibly a UTI. Well, I have no idea about the UTI. Again, it was Poppy's decision to pay for all of these things, and it was Poppy and Xena pressuring Noah Flake to show up and behave as if they were still together. Poppy even went as far as to claim that Noah owed them money for the flight as if it was their idea. Soon after came more accusations of Noah Flake being abusive, even sexually abusive, in an assault by deception kind of way. They suggested Noah was an absent parent, again in reference to her child Alter, and seethed a lot about them having partners besides Poppy, an obvious violation of the whole polyamory thing, but at this point, who's really counting? There's also walls upon walls of text messages Poppy sent Noah over Discord, which I will bless myself with not having to read because they're just stalker tier drivel not worthy of attention. This is your brain on 10,000 years of roleplay, folks. People just become fanfiction characters in real life and purposely fill their lives with demented drama. This is a technically middle-aged person actually reposting cringe, sad illustrations and tagging their ex. Once the news that Poppy accused Noah of SA because they didn't continue dating after having sex hit the community, it finally got a lot of people's attention because of how obviously reprehensible, confusing, and what is even going on? Unlike Noah, Poppy and Xena had a small community to whom they spread their narrative, effectively committing defamation since they were accusing an innocent person of sexual abuse. As some people began rallying to Noah's defense, showing that Poppy was pressuring and badgering Noah to give in to their demands, other people who had experiences with P and Z decided to come forward as well. One of these people was a former associate of theirs, Dormiu, who recounted their visit to the P and Z household. Poppy maintained a habit of staying up until around 5 or 6 in the morning in the office, the room I was sleeping in. The issue was compounded by the fact that I needed to be out of the room by 11 a.m. so Poppy could attend appointments for clients. I was consistently running on about 5 hours of sleep for the whole week, and as a result, I was overly emotional and had trouble keeping stable. But the lack of sleep was nothing compared to the real reason I'm writing this thread. To make it clear, I was 18 at the time, and I'm only 19 now, and Poppy and I's dynamic was entirely platonic and non-sexual. In the first few days, an incident occurred wherein Poppy had been getting changed and I had been in the living room. Poppy emerged wearing a shirt, underwear, and no pants. I looked away, as I would naturally. Poppy noticed this, and her response was what upset me. Poppy chided me for averting my eyes and invoked my weird asexual bullshit. I am ace, but this had nothing to do with it. Later in the week, I was painting, sitting at Xena's desk in the office, and Poppy had just gotten out of the shower. She came into the office all but naked and sat down opposite me. When I looked up to greet her, I only then noticed that she was topless in front of me, and I immediately looked away, shocked. Poppy then, in an almost confused tone, said, "What? They're my tits." I did not consent to see Poppy in any degree of undress, and she knowingly flashed me while I was a guest in her home. Xena overheard from the kitchen and asked what had happened. When the hilarious anecdote about Poppy exposing herself to me was relayed to Xena, they laughed it off. Just a few days after this drama began to get traction in the community, Sage, another one of Poppy's partners, began defending them and accusing Noah of SA, as well as painting everyone who'd back Noah up as a bandwagon. Now, there is some lore that I don't think is particularly worth getting into regarding Sage, but I do think it's relevant that screenshots eventually came out that showed Sage aiding Poppy in acclimating minors to explicit stuff on their Discord server. Basically, Poppy was deliberately posting not safe for work furry art, and I use that word loosely, in the safe for work sections of their server, and Sage was defending them doing this. Make of this what you will, but believe me,
it gets worse.
Someone under the name Brit Galaxy Brain on Tumblr made a post saying, "Poppy indirectly reached out to me in 2022 to offer her platform to help spread awareness of the individual this blog was made to keep an eye on. Poppy looked at all the evidence I had at the time, it has since grown and gotten much worse, and acknowledged the obvious danger involved. This person, Lily Orchard, has a truckload of documented evidence dating back to 2008 and a ton of personal testimonies proving she is a PDF file, a zoophile, and a serial abuser. Poppy acknowledged this. Instead of sticking to her word, she defended Lily against the PDF file allegations in public. Despite seeing the chat logs of Lily admitting to being attracted to children on top of the multiple graphic CP fanfictions she has written, Poppy picked multiple arguments with me because I refused to stop calling Lily what she is. I got sick of it and left. Last year, Poppy got in contact with Lily's sibling, whom Lily abused between the ages of 6 and 14, and wrote into damn near every work of fiction she's ever created. Poppy attempted to get involved with Lily's siblings as well as myself, even going as far as to send incestuous, furry, not safe for work stuff to Courtney. Let me reiterate, Poppy sent incest porn to a survivor of incest. These are very serious accusations and an entirely different can of worms, but it's definitely relevant to Poppy's case. Not only has Courtney, the person mentioned in that text as supposedly being the victim of Lily Orchard, personally backed these accusations up, but Poppy has publicly supported incest as well. Additionally, an old F list of Poppy's, which was unfortunately archived, contained interests with incest in a specified age range that went as low as 14. Remember that whole thing of Poppy calling Noah mom? Yeah. Last but not least, Poppy was also exposed for having shared Spawn's medical records on Discord without their consent and leaked the full name of a client of theirs to their entire Discord chat, violating patient confidentiality, both of which are actual crimes. Mind you, at this time, P&Z were trying to frame all of their accusers as part of a cyber harassment campaign guilty of doxing Poppy simply by using the name they practiced under. One of the most concerning allegations that came out in this wave was from a tweet that read, "Poppy also helped to hide Lorelei Bailey, another predator and a federal informant of trans femmes, when it was revealed she was in charge of major survivor resource communities and was trying to build influence in political spheres." In the replies, the poster attached screenshots of Poppy interacting with the supposed alt accounts of this person, said to be a rapist and FBI informant, and at one point, Poppy's partner. There are so many different cans of worms to open when talking about every misdeed of Poppy and Xena that it's impossible to tackle them all at once, and I bet more will come out after this video. But with all of these people attacking them, it begs the question, who was still on their side? Well, my best friend and love interest, Tipster, for one. Tippy was caught lacking when he was called out for liking some of Poppy's horny tweets despite being married, and somehow this turned into Poppy being the victim, culminating in a mass flagging campaign on Boblax's tweet. Another Poppy defender is my greatest fan, Keffels, who collaborated with Poppy and Xena to make anti-Kiwi Farms content, but that relationship also seems to have cooled off as time passed, and Poppy kept dragging Keffels into unrelated drama. At the end of the day, Poppy and Xena were alone to deal with the consequences of their actions, and the community they'd spent years catering to turned their backs on them. At some point, Noah Flake called Poppy's in real life place of employment and left a complaint, and I don't know if this was the direct cause of what I'm about to say, but Poppy was given an ultimatum. Either they would have to stop streaming permanently, or Poppy was going to lose their job. The job was what kept the lights on and the kitchen counter moldy. These two lived in New York and were paying for flights and hotel rooms for their multiple sexcapades, so I'm assuming the job paid well. However, Poppy refused to stop streaming, sealing their fate for good. Of course, this was painted as a violation of their civil liberties and transphobia, but at this point, Poppy and Xena's words were falling on deaf ears. They continued to have an online presence, yelling into the void about how Noah Flake was evil. Unsurprisingly, no legal ramifications ever came of those allegations, since if Poppy told the story to a judge, they'd either get laughed out of court or the judge would die like a Victorian child getting yellow fever. Just having to learn about all of this is too much for an old man to handle. Poppy can still technically practice as a counselor since their license appears to continue to be valid, but I doubt anyone will want to employ someone like that. Most recently, Noah Flake was interviewed by a YouTube channel called Bagman Burns, retelling the story from their point of view. You'd think that after all of this, Poppy and Xena would have some degree of self-reflection about their behavior, but no, not even a little bit. The only way they'd ever consider the possibility they're a bad person is if it's to self-flagellate for empathy or to immediately follow it up by blaming everyone else. So much for the wholesome degenerates, but I tried. I've been Turkey Tom, thanks for watching, and until next time, leave me alone.